What's up guys, Johnny Cooper here, and can you believe that it's been almost 2 years since CTR Nitro-Fueled came out? I honestly can't believe that it's been that long. It feels like it's only been a year since the game and Grand Prix came out. So many good memories from that game, and I hope that Beanox will take the cut characters that we'll be talking about today and put them in a sequel installment. Back in March of 2020, a month after the final Grand Prix came out, we were led to believe that we were going to be getting more post-Grand Prix content, since there was no clear confirmation that they were going to stop updating the game, which unlike the usual Grand Prix, these new ones will only contain skins, cards, and new characters. No tracks or big events anymore. We'd figured it was going to be an easier job for Beanox to do now, since they won't have to be organizing the huge leaderboard events and whatnot, and that they can now focus on fixing the more necessary issues like online, glitches, and possible crossplay, which, spoiler alert, they didn't. But many members in the Crash community were confused on why the update stopped, since everything was going according to plan, and you're probably confused on what they're talking about. So let me clue you in. Way before Beanox revealed the other Grand Prix that will come out after the Spyro one in September, Beta M data mined the game and found characters that Beanox will be using in the future Grand Prix. And you won't believe it, they came true. This list here showed all the pre-existing characters that were in the base game and all the new characters that were going to be added in the future Grand Prix. Like for example, we got Pasadena, Emperor Velo, Nina, Koala Kong, Spyro, Nasty Narc, Chicken Stew, Rillaroo, and even King Chicken. This was all the way back in July of 2019 to give you a bit more of context. Of course, they did eventually add characters that weren't in the data mine like Hasty, Cratebox, and Megamix. But you see, people used to think that this list became inaccurate once the Back in Time Grand Prix came out, since Baby Cortex and Baby Entropy weren't present despite being in the data mine. Thought Baby Crash, Baby Coco, and Baby T were. But many months later, and eventually those babies found their way to our consoles in the post Grand Prix. But now that Nitro-Fueled is long gone and done, what are the characters that are left from that list that didn't make it into Nitro-Fueled, aka the cut characters? Well, that will be no other than Ripto, the Sorceress, and Willy Wumpa-Cheeks, 2 Spyro characters and 1 Crash character. People expected both Ripto and the Sorceress to be in the Spyro Grand Prix back in September of 2019, but we only received Spyro, Nasty Narc, and Hunter, no Ripto or the Sorceress. I think that they could have shoved them in, considering Grand Prix like the Winter Festival one had 5 characters. They will have fit real nice and will have made the Grand Prix much more stronger than it was, considering it was the weakest one in my opinion. For a bit, I thought maybe Beanox had the models and everything ready for these characters, but Activision didn't want to give them more funding to hire the voice actors. But it hit me. They already had Ripto and the Sorceress voice actors in the credits when you beat the story mode, and this was before the Grand Prix started, where we have Greg Berger and Sissy Jones. Now, we don't get which voice actors voiced who in the credits, so I had to rely on IMDb to find out. And as it checks out, Sissy did the voices of Amy plus additional characters, and Craig just did quote-unquote additional characters. I did more research on who he voiced, even going through his wiki, but nothing turned up. It doesn't even show he was in the game, meaning the additional characters they were supposed to do or did was Ripto or the Sorceress, which both ended up being cut from the Grand Prix. The final conclusion I came up with is that Ripto and the Sorceress were never going to be in the Spyro Grand Prix, but instead a second one. Yeah, you heard me. It seems that they were going to do a second Spyro-themed Grand Prix and a second prehistoric playground featuring Baby Tropy, Baby Cortex, and the lab assistant. I went through some Reddit posts to see if some people had a similar theory as mine, and well, they did. In r/Crash Bandicoot, a user posted his theory that Beanox will recycle the Grand Prix but change the characters and a few things, with this post saying, "Theory about data mine Grand Prix characters. Since a lot of the data mine skins are already in the game, the rest of the data mine content is pretty much confirmed. That for some reason Baby Cortex and Baby Tropy were not available during the last Grand Prix, and now Ripto and the Sorceress are nowhere to be seen. We also know that there are at least 6 Grand Prix. I think that once all the Grand Prix are over, they'll start all over again with Nitro Tour. During the second cycle of the Grand Prix, the main characters will stay the same. Tana, Baby T, Spyro, but the pit stop characters will change. Instead of Baby Crash and Baby Coco, we'll get Cortex and Tropy, you know, the baby versions. And instead of Hunter and Nasty Narc, we'll get Ripto and the Sorceress. That way, players who already completed the Grand Prix will have a reason to come back." And some guy replied saying, "Like the idea of more Grand Prix, don't like the idea of reruns. More likely stuff was cut due to time constraints," which is probably really, the main thing that happened, but we're just going through theories right here. But it backs up my theory that Beenox were going to recycle some themes. I don't think they were going to recycle the whole Grand Prix like the OP said on Reddit, but at least a few or just those two that I said before to keep the game going for more months. While also adding in Willy Wumpa Cheeks in one of them, considering he was the final Crash character that was in the data mine but never made it in. A shame really, considering we have the main antagonists of CTR and CNK in this game, that of Oxide and Velo, but not Tag Team Racings. I mean, you already have Pasadena, Chicken Stew, and Von Clutch. Why not Wumpa Cheeks? I do think that Activision had something to do with stopping the Grand Prix after the Velo one, and I know some of you guys may be thinking, well, they could have just added them for a sequel post Grand Prix update after the Baby Cortex one, and well, I think that Beenox probably thought about that at first. They decided that instead of wasting Ripto, the Sorceress, and Wumpa Cheeks in a non-big event Grand Prix, that they'll instead be saved up for the next installment, or Activision themselves told them to save these Grand Prix, ideas, characters, and other stuff that they were most likely going to be planned in future Grand Prix like Viscount, the Evil Twins, and some more Spyro characters like Bianca and Elora for a CTR Nitro-Fueled 2. If that did happen, then that's pretty smart on them, since I'm dying on a sequel to CTR Nitro-Fueled already, and they definitely have lots of unused ideas for the game that they could use with a new story mode. A final theory on why the Grand Prix ended all of a sudden and why the characters got cut is this. Beenox was called in at the last minute to finish up Spyro 4. On Reddit, someone posted this. Beenox developing Spyro 4. Development started last year, 2020, using Unreal Engine 4, modeled after the original trilogy, returning characters, new difficulty selection, very small RPG elements added. Originally started as a Vicarious Visions project, but now that they are working on Diablo, and Activision has moved this project to Beenox as they believe they're ready to take on a full project by themselves. The new game is very similar to the original Spyro trilogy, but now it will have some RPG elements such as leveling up your charge attack, flame, gliding, and also there will be small fetch quests in certain realms in the game. You can now select your difficulty between default and experience. Not called Spyro 4, codename is Rainbow. Release won't be until around Q2 2022, announcement planned this holiday. I think we all know by now that Vicarious Visions, who worked on the Insane trilogy, Tony Hawk, and other Crash games, were merged with Blizzard Gaming. So there is a possibility that before that happened, they were going to do Spyro 4, but since the merger happened, they gave the rest of the project to Beenox to finish it up during early 2020, around the same time the final Grand Prix were coming out. Hence, Beenox having to stop the Grand Prix and have half of their division to work on Spyro 4, the other half on Crash 4's inverted modes, and some on wrapping the Grand Prix up, which in this scenario will have to be that the Grand Prix weren't going to finish around March and instead keep going before all this shit was put on the table. Beenox never confirmed the fate of Nitro-Fueled back then, and the data mine practically proving that everything became true made many people hold out hope that they'll update it in the first year anniversary of Nitro-Fueled in June to include Ripto, the Sorceress, and Willy Wumpa Cheeks. But no. Nothing. Months and months passed by, and in September, which, wow, Beenox, very late for you, but they finally gave us a confirmation on the fate and future of CTR Nitro-Fueled. On the official Twitter of Beenox, they posted this. Maybe Beenox thought that they could be back with more Grand Prix if they finish up Spyro 4 or the inverted modes early, or something in that line, which sounds impossible thinking about it in the end, which is why they probably didn't announce it earlier, instead of September. So there's a chance that it just didn't turn out the way they might have wanted to. There isn't any more cut content in this game besides the characters. Most of the concept art we've received for Nitro-Fueled is pretty much how it all turned out in the final product, or at least extremely similar, unlike Crash 4, where lots of skins, designs, levels, and other stuff were cut, which you can check out that video in the description below, but there are extreme noticeable changes that were made in CTR. Prototype Amy and Megumi. There are models inside the game's base code of Megumi and Amy that are more closer with their original CTR models. Megumi looks mostly the same compared to her final model, while Amy had much more bigger eyes and her classic hairstyle from the original game. If you guys remember, the trophy girls in the original game had a more anime style look, so it seems that Beenox were going to replicate that for the remake, but they decided to drop that instead and make it more in line with Tawna, Crash, and Coco's models, considering they're all bandicoots. Very good choice, as their characters look way better in the final product. Several of the character skins were changed a month after the game's release during halfway through the Nitro Squad Grand Prix to avoid any controversy due to the way the skins were named. That being, this is a comparison of the original versus the updated one. Watermelon Tana, Summertime Tana, White Tana, White Tiger Tana, Black Zem, Solar Flame Zem, White Entropy, Quartz Entropy, Black Entropy, Carbon Fiber Entropy, Red Papu Papu, Crimson Papu Papu. If I remember correctly, there were articles that talked about this, so backlash was received and controversy was also talked about, but nothing that brought the whole game down or cancelled. Title screen. The title screen used to be static with the key logo artwork being featured instead of the fully animated 3D rendered Crash we see in the final game, which was updated as the Grand Prix went by to feature the main character from that Grand Prix. Then when the Grand Prix ended, it went back full circle to the first time where the title was just Crash Bandicoot when the game released. Icons and menus. All of the character icons were different and they all look like the 3D models used in the game with a black outline and no other embellishments. The icon borders were brighter and the selection area was closer to the left. The menu background was darker and didn't feature a superimposed checkered layer. The scrolling icons were smaller as well. The icon for toggling the current character stats was a magnifying glass rather than a group of graph bars. The character names weren't shown. The ready text was of a solid white. The character selection platform lacked the shadow underneath. Minor visual differences. The white stones in Crash Cove's start line looked unnaturally bright. The stopwatch icon was smaller but the time was wider. Besides being different, the character icons were considerably smaller. The orange text had a more subtle gradient and the superscripted text on the player's current position was larger. The Wumpa fruit on the counter was darker, but it also had sparkles that floated upwards. Uka Uka's icon. Uka Uka's icon lessened the detail as a whole and it even lacked the iconic stripes on his forehead. Finishing racers. Upon finishing a race, only the racers who have already crossed the finish line will appear in the results, one by one. The final version always shows everyone with no time displayed for those who haven't finished yet. White fire. The blue flames gained from Super Turbo Pads were originally yellow and white, which will have looked so basic because it will have just been the exact same thing with no differentiality at all, you know, so I'm glad they added the blue flame to really separate everything. No reserves. The boost reserve system was missing from several early builds of the game, which was considerably odd given this had always been a key feature to the original CTR game. This resulted in this game being much more slower and less competitive. Fortunately, the developers added reserves to the game before release after listening to the fan community's feedback. Imagine the final game being slower and less competitive. It will have honestly ruined the game, and I'm glad the fan community gave the feedback to Beanox to update that. Otherwise, CTR Nitro-Fueled will have been such a mess. Juicing up. Wumpa fruits will have been added to the counter much more slowly. Power-ups will become juiced up as soon as the player broke a crate that will give them a total of 10 Wumpa fruits, even before the 10th one was added. Shields. After colliding with something, shields won't shatter to pieces. Oxide and Gangster pinstripe icons. This is an off-screen photo of a public demo. It seems to be the only known version that features these front view icons for Nitrous Oxide and Gangster pinstripe, the latter of which is an odd choice to have in the character select screen considering it's just a skin. Fasty. There are references to an unused character called Fasty in the code. Fasty is a fan-made name for what many assume was a removed CTR, a blue hippo in a pilot outfit. His actual name was Ripto, and he had nothing to do with CTR. The Crash Mania article that explains this was published just before the game's release, so was likely the catalyst for his removal. All mentions of him in the code were removed in versions 1.02, ironically turning him into an actual removed CTR character in the end. So it seems that Beanox were maybe going to use the blue hippo that people used to talk about in the Crash community before that was the quote-unquote CTR cut character, but instead, you know, seeing that this wasn't an actual cut character, they instead based off Fasty on Hasty, the final character that ended up in the game. Another change was the addition to another Rillaroo. Back in November, when Rillaroo was teased in a 2D poster of the Neon Circus track with the data mine that month, saying he'll be coming out in the next Grand Prix, fans got super excited since they thought his new modern design will have been a perfect adaptation, if you can even call it that, of his original appearance, Crash Bash. However, in December, he was released and people on Twitter got mad, upset, and disappointed. They hated his face. face, but mostly his mouth if I remember correctly. People made edits to show how Rillaroo should have been compared to what we got. People even went on Beanock's Twitter to send them these edits so they can update Rillaroo's design to his more classic counterpart. It wasn't until the Grand Prix were over and we got that big final post-Grand Prix update where we were hit with a big surprise. When going into the character selection screen, there was a separate character called Fixed Rillaroo. The body was the same, but the face was adjusted. His mouth was smaller and way in the bottom with his beard being shortened, with the idle animations having the original opening his mouth a lot more, while the fixed version's mouth is much more closed. But yeah, instead of just updating the design of the original model or making it as a skin, he was made as a whole new character, with the name being Fixed Rillaroo to really rub it in to those who complained. Honestly, this is one of the best things Beanox did in CTR Nitro-Fueled. It really shows you that they do listen to feedback and that they do a little trolling once in a while. Of course, that being the Fixed Rillaroo and the addition of the Iron Crate Box checkpoint thingy as a playable character, nobody really expected that. A change that wasn't in the original launch of the story mode but was added later on was the inclusion of golden eggs in the hub area, where you'll have to collect them through each different section of the hub. When visiting the Papu Papu section, there will be empty egg slots where you can put all the eggs you collected and unlock King Chicken. The empty slots was in the base game during its launch of June 2019, but was not usable until months later in the Circus Grand Prix, November 2019. Another change in the tracks was the inclusion of Beanox crates during the post-Grand Prix update, almost a year after the original launch, where you'll find Beanox crates in every single track that was released. They were hard to find, but upon breaking all of them, you'll unlock the Iron Checkpoint Crate Box as a playable character. A big change was the choice of selecting your desired driving style, regardless of the character you chose to race with. This was added in the Spooky Grand Prix in October, but before then, you weren't able to change the driving style of your favorite character. Like if that character's stats was speed, you won't be able to change it to acceleration. So back then, people didn't choose their favorite all the time since they had to pick another character that they knew will win the race or, were more preferable, when it comes to their stats. However, with the Spooky Grand Prix update, all this was fixed. The name of the driving styles were also changed with an additional one added. Beginner is now turn, intermediate A is balance, intermediate B is acceleration, and advanced is speed. A fifth driving style, drift, has been added. It has 6 speed, 2 acceleration, and 3 turn, a slight compromise on the speed style for better turning. The sixth driving style is classic, which defaults to your character's original driving style. This is a style used when playing the adventure mode under the classic setting. I'm glad this was changed because it was for the best. This isn't a change but a little fun fact. Before they even landed on the name CTR Nitro-Fueled, one of the possible names they were going to choose was CTR Revved Up. Another sort of big one I remember was the online lobby menu. Back then it only had private match, matchmaking, and friends, but they changed it during the Spyro Grand Prix, where pit stop and Wumpa challenges were added and private match and matchmaking changed places. Also, when you play with friends or randos, the camera cranes up to better showcase the customization loadouts of the players. The back row is also offset slightly to the right for the same reason. But before the Spyro Grand Prix, the camera won't pan up and it remained the same way it did before you even joined matchmaking, just zooming a little out to show the players. I managed to find legendary skins that didn't make it into the final cut. When CTR Nitro-Fueled released, players noticed how Papu Papu was the only OG CTR character to not receive a legendary skin. However, this was not the case before the game's launch. Sumo Papu Papu was seen in a magazine to hype up the game's launch along with a podium animation of the legendary skin. This was most likely cut due to Papu Papu being a controversial character in the Crash series, so they probably thought this was quote-unquote racist and they cut the whole thing entirely. Sad because the skin will have fit with the ending of CTR considering he becomes a wrestler. Penta's skin is also different from the final game, where in the final product he has a ninja suit with big yellow eyebrows and a different hairstyle. The magazine model bears no ninja suit and just a small headband and a sword, looking more like the ninja penguins from CTR. I can see why they changed it. There was also supposed to be a Santa Papu Papu skin during the Winter Festival Grand Prix, but it can be assumed that it was cut for the same reason the Sumo Papu Papu skin was. Papu's pyramid looked very different from the final game. This is a shot of the track when CTR Nitro-Fueled got announced, and this is the final shot from the final product. If we compare both, you can see how much detail we see in the background of the early build, specifically the mountains, as in the finished game, it's way more blander with clouds covering a lot of the background. This is so the racer can focus more on the track, since Beanox probably thought thought the background would distract the players, or maybe the consoles couldn't handle that much detail. Doubt it though, but what do you guys think of that? A request that fans wanted in the game before the release was the character icons changing color depending on which item they got hit by. This was in the original but not during the early builds, which as you can see here, nothing changed when Puller got hit. The final major change I have is Baby T. He used to have Crunch's dialogue with a high pitch effect for quite a while until he was given his own sounds with possibly another voice actor. I presume people complained about it to Beanox, but I don't know if this one was changed because of the feedback and it will have remained like that if nobody complained, or the crunch thing was just a placeholder. And that's basically it for the cut characters and changes in CTR Nitro-Fueled. I'm hoping these characters are being saved up for a planned CTR Nitro-Fueled 2 because I'm ready to gear up again and relive those glory days. I'm also holding out hope that Beanox are the ones making it. They really knocked it out of the park with this one, and I bet that they can make a fire-ass sequel with new tracks, stories, and characters. Are you guys sad that Ripto, the Sorceress, and Willy Wumpa Cheeks were cut? What will you guys want in the sequel? Which theory made more sense when it comes to the Grand Prix sudden end? Let me know down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.